I think we are, as humans, mysterious beings, and I like films that leave some room where there's space for us as audience members, where the ending doesn't always neatly wrap things up and tell us, oh, that's what the film was saying, where the film will just rather linger, stay with you for a while.
In The Currents, acclaimed Argentine-Swiss filmmaker Milagros Mumenthaler invites us into a mystery of a woman suddenly, inexplicably set adrift. There's a moment early in The Currents where a woman stands at a window looking out at a river and something shifts, not dramatically, quietly, the way a life can change before you've even found the words for it. At the center is Lina, an Argentinian designer who survives a mysterious plunge into a Swiss river and returns home a different woman, unable to explain what happened, unwilling to pretend that it didn't. What follows is not a conventional mystery, but an intimate psychological journey, dreamlike, fragile, and quietly unsettling, about identity, memory, and the parts of ourselves we try to leave behind. The director, Milagros Mumenthaler, is one of the essential voices in contemporary Latin American cinema. Her films, Back to Stay, The Idea of a Lake, and now The Currents, share an uncommon quality. They trust silence, they trust the body, they trust the audience to feel before they understand. Join us for a conversation with filmmaker Milagros Mumenthaler about her new film, The Currents, on Inside the Arthouse, starting now. Today's episode of Inside the Arthouse is sponsored by the Carsey Wolf Center.
Hi, my name is Greg Lumley.
And I'm Raphael Sparge.
And welcome to another episode of Inside the Art House. Today we are here to talk about the new film that's going to be opening on May 29 in New York, June 5 in Los Angeles, and then rolling out to the rest of the country. That film is directed by Milagros Mumenthaler, who is our guest here. The film is The Currents.
Hi.
So I guess I'll start this here, which is just to say this movie, which is a beautiful film. It opens with the lead, Lina, accepting an award in Geneva, surrounded by admiring colleagues. She got to the bathroom and she's looking at her trophy and she slides it in the trash. We then cut to another scene where she then jumps off a bridge suddenly without warning. I know you spoke about this idea of the mind doing one thing and the body doing another. I wonder if you could talk about what drew you to that.
So, in fact, the beginning of the image in the film begins with the image that I had of walking alongside the water in Geneva and thinking, what happens when a scene of a woman throwing herself into the water? And also the question of whether or not this was a conscious or an unconscious act. Obviously, if it is a conscious act, then we're talking about a suicide. But I wasn't sure at the beginning if I really wanted to address this as such a concrete act of a person trying to end their own life. That initial image gave rise to many questions. If it was conscious, then I don't know that I really wanted to do that, of portraying a suicide as such. It seemed to me that I had to make a decision. In parallel, at the same time, I was reading a book, La Mujer Temblorosa, I believe The Trembling Woman, by Siri Husvet. And she tells of an account in which she was to address an audience that was honoring her father. She began speaking, and while she was speaking, her body begins to tremble and even to shake in a way that was evident. But she continued speaking as if nothing were happening to her. And so she talks about this disassociation of the body from the mind in this book. The book is autobiographical. This was also interesting because it seemed to me to evoke this idea of the body having its own memory. Sort of when the mind can't process certain things, then the body takes over, manifests itself. Another event that influenced me was a documentary that tells the story of a young German woman, 19 years old, who arrives in Argentina wanting to visit the country. She goes to the bathroom, and while she's in the bathroom, she hears a woman singing a lullaby. And unexpectedly, she begins to cry and is really in an emotional state and is sort of out of control. And the first thing she does, she calls her parents. And in that conversation, she learns that she herself was adopted and had been the daughter of disappeared persons in Argentina. So this also evokes the idea of somehow the body itself processing things necessarily separate from the mind, that there's some situations in which the body is able to, we don't know how, keep a record or a memory of things that happen. And then unexpectedly they manifest themselves.
So is that sort of that classic Freudian distinction between, we divide into body and mind, but the mind is part of the body, I guess, and are there things that we have memories of and we've sort of buried them so that they're no longer conscious and yet they're still part of ourself?
Yes.
The story of this woman's journey feels less in a way like she's falling apart and more like she's just becoming almost unfamiliar with herself. As she travels, she is more and more isolated in the world. She is a bystander looking in at her life in many scenes, and there's a sense of kind of almost a disassociation. How important was that to you? Or was that a theme that was wrapped into the vision of this?
Sí, a mí hay como algo me parece que
Yes, I think that there is something there, but also in Lina's case, nothing around her really does change. Her husband is still there, her daughter is still there, the daily chores are the same, and so she finds herself in a struggle almost against herself. And one of these elements that I think is very present is it has to do with a place of belonging. And as regards that belonging, Lina is clearly in crisis. She feels she doesn't belong. That's a solitary experience for her, not knowing where you can feel fulfilled. I think Lina has very consciously left a life behind as Cata, and she's made decisions to become Lina. And she's made a decision as to who she wants to be. But that led her also into conflict with this place of belonging. I think she's Cata to some, she's Lina to others, but she doesn't really herself feel like she's either wholly. She doesn't find places in her life where she belongs.
I
think there is something throughout the whole film that is a sense of displacement, of being on the margins of certain currents. And the whole mise en scène is something that we experience through Lina's eyes, how she perceives herself at any given time, and how Lina perceives the world at that same time.
Yeah, there are many scenes where all of a sudden Lina is not seen, or she's not seeing the whole person, or she's focusing in on aspects of a person, whether it's their hands, their jewelry, earrings, and feet in many cases. When did you arrive at the idea of using that language?
Sí, creo que ahí es como hay algo.
I think when we see where she sets her gaze, that's true in terms of your question about the jewelry, the hands, and the feet. But throughout the entirety of the film, I think we see that when she loses herself in the old city, for example, where there's hardly anyone present, there's no noise, we're sort of in a place that's been suspended, right, in time. This has more to do with her because it's her perception of wanting to be there. It's a very intimate way of gazing or looking as to how she perceives the world. When the close-up is on her, even though there's, say, a lot of wind in the scenes of Geneva that we see, the close-up of her seems to alter that and show that this is her perception as well. I would say I worked a great deal to be in the skin of this character and to see where she sets her gaze, the thoughts that occur to her. I'm not sure that it's a particularly specific choice, this business of the feet or the hands. I can't really give you a concrete answer as to why I did that. I think you just imagine as you try to put yourself in the skin and the experience of the character, and these ideas, these visual ideas that occurred to me, I included. Some I included more, some less. It's sort of a box of tools that I work with in composing the film. I also drew from my own experience of looking at my grandmother's hands. I always looked at them a lot, thinking that those hands reflected so much of an experience, of a lived experience, of a past. Lina's gaze also rests on this woman who sews a corset, and that's something that's disappearing and is going to be sort of lost to time, but also tells the story of a life. There's a certain nostalgia, I would say, in Lina's gaze of something that she knows is going to disappear.
You know what? Let's take a look at the trailer for the film The Currents, directed by our guest, Milagros Mumenthaler.
Mamá, ¿puede venir?
El pasajero.
Quiero que dejemos de hacer como que acá no pasa nada. Tengo miedo.
Hi, I'm Raphael Sparge, co-host of Inside the Arthouse, and we're thrilled that this episode is sponsored by the Carsey Wolf Center at the University of California, Santa Barbara. The Carsey Wolf Center supports research, teaching, and public programming about film and media, reflecting the vision of their founding benefactors, Marcy Carsey and Dick Wolf. The center's goal is to foster informed dialogue, critical skills, historical understanding, and new forms of literacy for a global and interconnected world. The center also presents free public screening events and conversations with filmmakers and scholars in the beautiful Pollock Theater at UCSB. Head over to their newly launched YouTube channel at Carsey Wolf UCSB to watch recordings of their most recent conversations. Highlights include a conversation with UCSB alum Andy Jurgensen, the winner of the 2026 Academy Award for Editing for One Battle After Another, or their recent panel on the future of moviegoing featuring Jason Reitman, Brad Sieberling, Maggie McKay, and Jackie Brenneman. Find out more at carseywolf.ucsb.edu.
One of the things that I find so moving about the movie is that we sense that there's something deep and seismic going on for Lina, but it's almost like she has a secret, but she's not confessing, she's not explaining it, there's no moment where we actually kind of get a real clear answer as to why things are going the way they're going. And there's this, it feels so intuitive, as if she's felt her way into this, but it lives in this ambiguity, which has such an emotional response, at least in terms of sitting and watching it, as we kind of traveled with her. And how did you resist not trying to find an answer or try and sort of box it into a classic design of a reason why this happened?
Porque en realidad generalmente siempre trabajo de esta forma.
I always do this in my films, I think. I have a great deal of respect as a director for the characters. I respect what Lina does in the film. She's not looking for a diagnosis. She does something else that's much more brave. She lets herself be taken away, if you will, or carried along, like in a current. And I respect that. I like to think that it's an active process for her of being carried away by the current. And until she looks for a concrete answer, it's impossible for me as the director to show the audience one for her. We see the film through her eyes. For me, there's no way in which I will be disrespectful of that. And it was in a way an easy decision to take. And in addition to what you see in the film itself, I'd already done a lot of work writing about her childhood, her friend Amalia, when she decides to leave her husband, when she decides to leave and move out of her mother's home. So this character, in a way, takes on a life of her own. And through that character, I know that there's certain things that are just not going to be allowed. I'm not going to be able to do them as a director. So I don't know that I wouldn't say that I made a decision for her. The character informs that, and this sense of being carried along or being adrift in an active way.
Sí, nunca fue como qué postura tomo.
There's a beautiful montage sequence set to music by Holst from the planet's Venus, the giver of peace. And at some level, that's not from Lina's eyes, and yet maybe it is. I mean, it happens when she's in the tower, and she sees sort of the entire community, her world, sort of. Was that always when the thought of including that in the film, and I guess maybe even specifically that piece of music, because it's just a beautiful sequence.
En realidad, desde como que en algún momento.
So at a point, the treatment of the character, I think, was that Lina could imagine for herself different possible lives that she could have, and there wasn't a connection necessarily, I think, to the lighthouse, but rather to a person observing the rooftops and the chimney, and then the smoke coming from the chimney that takes us to another scene. I don't know that the connection was immediately with the light as such, but so it's not the light from the tower that is what unifies it, but much more the smoke from the chimney that gives unity or unifies that whole sequence. But there were also in Lina's imaginary. I think she imagines things, very simple things, like singing in a choir or calling a friend to get together, and where she imagines that maybe those little things are going to give her happiness, but they're things that somehow she can't do in the end.
Sí, sí, me parece importante como solo mencionar como las cosas pequeñas que no puedo hacer, como el coro.
I thought it was important to mention small things like singing in a choir or having the spontaneity of calling a friend to get together, and that you don't give up on doing those little things.
De hacerlas.
There's so much else I want to ask you about. I know we're a little pressed for time, but I guess the simplest immediate question I want to ask is that when the audience leaves the currents, what do you hope that stays with them?
Sí, a mí hay algo que siempre como que me gusta aclarar.
So I like to clarify this sometimes before the projection of a film, that I think we are, as humans, mysterious beings, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. I like films that leave some room where there's space for us as spectators or as audience members, and where the ending doesn't always neatly wrap things up and tell us, oh, that's what the film was saying, where the film will just rather linger, stay with you for a while, and where you can identify. I like the idea that we're going to be able to identify with certain things that are happening to Lina, and we're going to think about her after the film, to be able to live with that for some time.
Sí, que te quede como una sensación un poco.
And where there are certain images that will linger with us from the film, and in our own body we will have experienced that. And then we're not necessarily going to look for answers where Lina herself doesn't, and it wouldn't be fair for us to be looking for answers where she doesn't.
I like that. Well, we think we live in extra complicated times, and that the problems that we have today are greater than they ever were. But I think the film really sort of, in a way, reminds us that being human has always been complicated, and without providing those answers, as you say, it maybe it helps us, can help people today, sort of not with a direct answer about how to uncomplicate their lives, but certainly the idea that that we can find peace and contentment and find a place to return. So it's a welcome film at this time, and I can't thank you enough for making it and bringing it to us. Of course, we're going to thank Kino Lorber for distributing the film in the United States. If you want information about where The Currents is playing, you can get that on their website at kinolorber.com. The film is The Currents. Again, it's opening on May 29th in New York, and then on June 5 in Los Angeles, and rolling out to art houses around the country thereafter. So, Milagros Mumenthaler, thank you very much for joining us here on Inside the Art House to talk about The Currents.
Thank you to you. Thank you very much for this moment.
My pleasure. And thank you to everyone who's watching this. And if you've enjoyed it, please like and subscribe and share. Again, where you talk about interesting films and films that are not necessarily cookie cutters. They're not made for everybody, but we feel they're entertaining and worth seeing. And we hope you join us again on Inside the Art House to learn about these movies as they're opening in theaters in the United States. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.